Please accept my greetings. I really appreciate your presence and your curiosity in this subject, which is pranayama and bandha. So this is kind of an introduction to something which is foundational. And when I say foundational, it means it's not just basic in the sense uh, of something which is available anywhere, but it is basic in the sense that this foundational understanding can be transformative in the way how we look at subjects like pranayama and subjects like bandha. This is a short class, so I'm going to dive right in. I just wanted to take a moment and welcome all of you. And I sincerely hope that each one of you, whether you're joining the live stream or you're watching the replay, that you benefit from the investment of your time and energy and focus. I really, really hope that it is inspirational, it is insightful, and it is empowering you in your personal practice. Pranayama. I'm going to talk about these two subjects one by one. And my intention is that I hope that you can walk away with at least one thing that you can mull over, or one thing that is like a takeaway that you can actually start putting into practice. So I'll be talking about pranayama first and then bandhas. Pranayama. If you have practiced pranayama before or heard about pranayama before, more than just a term. If your camera is on, you can just wave. If your camera is not on, you can write Y or N in the chat, yes or no in the chat. Or you can use those, I don't know, what are they called? The reactions, heart and thumbs up, those kind of things. Wonderful. I see those of you whose cameras are on. I really appreciate your participation. Okay, I see the responses coming in. Wonderful. So it seems like most of us are familiar with the term pranayama, and maybe a little bit more than familiar, maybe even have practiced. Before I go ahead and share whatever is my limited understanding of pranayama, I want to share that we must begin with what is prana before going into what is pranayama, because pranayama is a step further than prana. So what is prana? Commonly, it is understood as life force or life energy or essential energy. And sometimes it is also equated with breath. But here is the deal. All of it is correct. But if we go a little bit deeper than just finding a meaning to it, a word for which is pointing towards the meaning, but go into the etymology of the word, I think it'll give us a lot more. Prana, the word prana is made up of two parts. Pra, the first part, prefix is pra. And pra means primary, foundational. Primary, foundational, innate, primordial. So that which is present essentially and is the cause of everything else to be present. Now, the suffix ana, A-N-A, comes from the Sanskrit word anu, A-N-U, which means atom. And not atom as in the tiniest unit of energy, the smallest unit of energy, the indivisible unit of energy, the ever-existing unit of energy. So if you combine these two parts, it means the tiniest unit of primordial energy, the primary unit of energy, the first unit of energy, the innate unit of energy. It's not just breath. It is the beginning of everything else. It is that which is the cause of anything that you are seeing, experiencing, tasting, that which is existing in the world, whether outside of you or inside of you. So it is the basic animating energy. It is not just breath. Breath is just a subset of it. Are you getting what I'm trying to say? Breath is just one of its possible legs, or one of its possible subsets, or one of its possible ways that the prana shows up. But even without breathing, it is every cell of our body is filled with prana. One of the words that is used uh, for a human being in the Sanskrit language is prani. Prani. And I know Lizzie is typing all these things in the chat. You can keep an eye on the chat. And prani means being of prana. So the human being is a being of prana, being of this animating anything, that it's not just the breath. Even if you blink your eye, you gulp, the movements that are going on within the body, the peristaltic movement, the transfer of information between the two nerve cells, everything that is happening, the opening and closing of the valves in the GI tract, everything that is happening, the shift and the changes of the emotions, the state of mind, all of that change, all of that shift, all of that animation is because of prana. So prana is something that is simply existing, that makes everything else exist. And breath is just one of the ways it exists. Are we on the same page about the word prana? That it is the minutest, indivisible unit of energy, which is the cause of everything else. The cause of this body, the cause of this emotion, the cause of mind. See, sometimes the confusion comes because we think in terms of koshas. Annamaya kosha, the physical sheath. Have you heard about koshas? Give me a thumbs up or yes, no, some way. Okay, I see the hands, I see the chat. Wonderful. So sometimes what happens is the confusion happens because we think that, oh, these are the two koshas. After the physical sheath comes the pranamaya kosha. And to some extent, it's correct. But if we really think of prana as the main animating energy, it is beyond all the five koshas, because it is the cause of the koshas even to exist. Are you getting what I'm saying? Yes, that is pranamaya kosha pointing towards breath. Breath as one of the containers, but all the koshas are a result of prana itself. So think about prana as an umbrella term, which sometimes becomes a specific when we are pointing towards breath. But it is not just breath. Breath is just an example of prana. When we talk about pranayama, pranayama, pranayama or pranayama, what we are talking about is the ability to hone into this reservoir of prana. So where is the reservoir of prana? We just talked about where is prana? Everywhere, not just in our breath, everywhere. It is outside of us, in the nature, in the mother nature, and it is inside of us, in the mind, in the emotions, in the physical body, in the pranic body, in our consciousness. So the prana, which is already existing, whether outside of us or inside of us, when we make that prana which is trapped, logged, unavailable, we make it available. That is pranayama. It is the releasing of the trapped prana, the releasing of the lodged or stuck prana. Why is the prana stuck? The prana is stuck because our physical body may have a poor metabolism. Maybe we are not breathing deeply. Maybe there are some dosha imbalances. So there is something else that is zapping and consuming the prana. So our prana levels are low, or prana is depleted, or we are not able to tap into the pranic source. Or maybe we have unresolved thoughts and emotions. Maybe we have too many negative thoughts. So at the mental level, emotional level, intellectual level, there are so many levels, right, Koshas? At any of these levels, the prana can get stuck. the prana can get locked, or the channels in which the prana is flowing. The channels in which the prana is flowing, which is called nadis in the subtle body, and which is also tissues in our physical body, maybe those channels are blocked. When we are able to, through the application of any technique, open up those channels, release the prana, tap into the prana, that expanded, extended, multiplied, available state of prana is called pranayama. Does it make sense a little bit? Now, because that is called pranayama, and now we know that there are so many sources of prana, the one thing that is clear is pranayama is not just a breath exercise or breath work or breathing technique. Why is it not a breath exercise or breath work or breathing technique? Because breath is just one source of prana. And when we are talking about pranayama, it is not talking about breath. Even if I mirror translate, the word ayama means expansion, extension, multiplication, availability of what? Of prana. I cannot even call it prana energization. Pranayama is not even prana energization. It could be whatever technique or whatever process we are using. Maybe we need to the work that is needed is not to energize the prana. Maybe our mind is over energized and hyperactive, and the mind need to calm down, and therefore now the prana is available. So we cannot call pranayama as a prana energization technique. It is a prana availability. It is the calibration or attunement of the prana in a way, whether it is by increasing or decreasing, whatever is needed to make it available. There are so many ways to come to that state of pranayama. Now, you see, I used a term here. Quietly, I used it there. The state of pranayama, not the technique of pranayama. Another common thing that we end up doing or we end up thinking about pranayama as is technique. Let's say I'm not using English word breath technique or breath work. Then I say pranayama technique. Even that would be wrong. Why would that be wrong? Because pranayama technique, we end up saying Anuloma Viloma, Bhastrika, Brahmari as those techniques. But if we look into Yoga Sutras, the texts of yoga, it is very clear the way pranayama is mentioned. Let's just take one example, Yoga Sutras. It is talked about in chapter 2 of Yoga Sutras. Pranayama is defined as a state. A state of what? When there are two qualities in the breath. What are those two qualities in the breath? Dirgha and Sukshma. When the breath mirrors these two qualities, when the breath becomes prolonged and subtle or deep, prolonged and subtle or deep, Dirgha means long, and Sukshma means subtle, subtle to the point that we may not even feel the flow of breath or the sound of breath when we are breathing. The breath becomes so subtle, so unctuous that we barely feel its presence, which is another reason in texts like Hatha Yoga Pradipika, in Gherand Samhita, pranayama is not mentioned as these techniques that we are talking about, Anuloma Viloma and so on. They are talked about as Kumbhakas. Have you heard the word Kumbhaka? Yes, I see some of you nodding. Okay. So Kumbhaka, if I translate it, which is again, that is not a correct translation, because the translation mirrored, it is because it's not even a mirror translation. The translation for the word Kumbhaka that is used is breath retention or breath suspension. Isn't it? Is that what you have heard too? I'm not making it up, right? Okay. But Kumbha means a pitcher or a pot. When your body becomes a container of prana, that is Kumbhaka. It's not even mirror translation, friends. So I don't know where did this come from, but it's causing a lot of confusion, misunderstanding, and sometimes even fear and aversion. I don't want to hold the breath. Breath hold should not be done by everybody, which is true. Everybody is not ready for breath hold, and the breath should not be held randomly as a technique, because the text itself, like Prana Upanishad, Varaha Upanishad, they talk about that when we work with prana, which means when we work prana calibration or prana attunement, if we are forcibly working with it, it is like working with a wild, these are the examples written in the text, as if you're working with a wild elephant or a wild horse or taming a lion. That you should not be forcibly holding the breath, because it's going to um, have a consequence, in the sense, have a reaction. So Kumbhaka is not breath retention, but in the texts, pranayamas, which we commonly know as pranayama, like Anuloma Viloma, Bhastrika, Ujjayi, and so on, they are called Kumbhakas. Again, it is pointing towards a state. Kumbhaka is another way of saying when the breath becomes so subtle that it feels like it doesn't even exist. Your breath is just, your prana is simply contained in the body, in the mind. There is no leakage of prana. So the breath becomes so subtle. What is one of the examples? Let's do a practical thing right now. If you keep your hand right under the nostril, you will feel the flow of breath. You do, right? You feel the touch of the breath in the back of the hand. Now, I want you to start lowering your hand slowly, only to the point where you still feel the touch of inhale and exhale. And keep moving down. See how far your breath goes. And sometimes it can go all the way up to the navel. Sometimes it can go all the way up to the knee. See how far it goes. Keep exploring. And once you feel that if I move an inch from here below, I don't feel the touch anymore, just stay, keep your hand there. Once you have reached there, use your other hand and keep it vertical over this hand without changing this hand, which is at the bottom. Now this is used to measure. This has become 4-finger width. Now let the hand which is on the top stay where it is. The hand which is at the bottom, lift it, keep it on top. Again, vertical. So now that will become 8-finger width, and keep going up till you reach the bottom of your nostrils. You might have to use 2 or 1-finger unit to measure. Now, if this is 4-finger unit, 8-finger unit, 12-finger unit, how many finger units is your breath? Write it in the chat. And if you're confused, do this exercise again. It could be 64, it could be 30, it could be 18, it could be 6, it could be 20, it could be 2. How many finger width is your breath? Just experiment. You're just experimenting with me. You're just going on a funky ride. Okay, I see your responses coming in. 8, 12, 24, 11, 14, 22, 13, 18, 32. All these, right? All these numbers. This is the way to measure how much prana is lost from the body. In pranayama, which another word for pranayama state, which means when the breath becomes dirgha and sukshma, your breath becomes just 1-finger width. It becomes so subtle that we barely feel its presence. So externally, it shortens. Internally, it lengthens. Externally, it shortens because you're not wasting all that prana, but internally it lengthens. So pranayama is whether by working with the breath, or diet, or rest activities like shavasana or yoga nidra, or even the practice of mantras or mudras, or practices of in Ayurveda like dinacharya, morning routine, evening routine. or calibration of diet or lifestyle, just checking in where is your prana getting leaked. And when you work on that particular practice or that particular diet or sleep or morning routine, evening routine, or specific practices like mantra, mudra, shavasana. See, I'm not just talking about breathing techniques. Through the practice of mantras, you can come to pranayama. Through the practice of mudras, you can come to pranayama. Through the practice of shavasana, you can come to pranayama. If we open up our mind and understand pranayama is not a breathing exercise, but a state of available prana, then we know that there are so many ways to come to pranayama. Does it make sense? A, what is prana? B, what is pranayama? It is a state, not the name of a technique. It is known by Dirgha Sukshma in Yoga Sutras. It is known by the term Kumbakha, which is if I want to further consolidate these two words, Dirgha and Sukshma, into one word, that will become Kumbhaka, which means the breath has become so subtle, so quiet. The breath also becomes subtle and quiet when the mind is calm, isn't it? When you are rested. So there are so many ways to arrive to that state, which is called Kumbhaka, which is not forceful breath retention. It is also a consequence. So pranayama is the consequence of the application of XYZ techniques, which makes prana available. If we understand that, think about the word pranayama, and the technique pranayama opens up for so many of us. Because not everybody is willing to or can work with the breath for so many reasons. Even when we work with the breath, because sometimes we think about, oh, let's say Anuloma Viloma, we call it alternate nostril breathing. You have heard of that? See, there is so much problem I have with translations. In this alternate nostril breathing, what I personally can agree to is just alternate. Because it is not about the nostril and it is not about the breathing. Because why it is not about the nostril? Pranayama is related to prana. Prana is a subject which is more related to the pranic body, which is the subtle body, which means we need to work with the subtle body to have the effect on the physical body. So if we are talking about pranayama through Anuloma Viloma, it is not talking about nostril, my friends. It is talking about nadis, the solar and the lunar channel, Pingala and Ida Nadi. The nadis end in the nostril space. But when we say it alternate nostril breathing, think about someone who has nasal congestion or deviated septum. Then for them, it becomes inaccessible because my nostrils are congested, or it is difficult for me to close the nostrils. Maybe I'm not comfortable. Maybe I have some trigger. Maybe it is claustrophobic. For whatever reason, because we have translated as alternate nostril, now we have also made it more susceptible to misunderstanding and restricted. If we simply thought about it as, I don't know what's the possible. So I'm not giving you the solution that, oh, instead of alternate nostril breathing, called alternate nadi breathing. I'm not telling you that. I'm just saying that when we say nostril breathing, we are making it inaccessible for so many folks because it is, first of all, not even the correct translation. It is about nadis. And in order to access to nadis, you have to simply concentrate on the 2 points, which are where your hard bone, nasal bone, touches the soft cartilage. If you slide your finger in the nasal region from the notch of the eye and slowly slide it, you will feel a point where the hard bone meets a soft cartilage. That is the point. Literally, that is the point. Those points are called marmas in yoga, in Ayurveda. And marmas are at the end of nadis. So the nadis, Ida and Pingla, end in these 2 points. So all we have to do is maybe gently touch these points. We don't even have to close the nostril. The idea is to bring attention to these points, either mentally or just with the touch, so that we can direct the prana into the nadi alternately. Not, not inhalation, exhalation, because that is more a respiratory activity, right? That is more related to the lungs. But here we are talking about the pranic body. So these are the 3 things I want you to keep in mind. One, what is prana and what is pranayama? That pranayama is pranayama is that prana which was not available earlier is available now. That is the state of pranayama. What is the parameter for it? It shows up into the breath as the breath becoming dirgha and sukshma, subtle and quiet. Almost, if you're more of a visual person, then the breath becomes like a stream of oil. It becomes smooth, so smooth, quiet, even, continuous, like a stream of oil. These are examples from the texts. And another word that is used for pranayama is kumbhaka, which is not breath retention, which is again that the breath becomes so subtle, so quiet that it may feel as if you are holding the breath. But you're not holding the breath. The breath becomes just 1 finger width from the nostril area. 2, second thing that I want you to remember from the class today is that there are many ways to pranayama. In fact, let me add this one thing here. Did you know that mantra is the OG pranayama? Mantra is the original pranayama. Yeah, what we think of as today as techniques mentioned in texts. By the way, Yoga Sutras do not mention any technique like Brahmari, Bhastrika, Surya Bhedan, Chandra Bhedan. None of these techniques are mentioned in Yoga Sutras. It only talks about Dirgha Sukshma. When the friction is removed from the process of inhale, exhale, and the transition between inhale, exhale, and exhale, inhale, when that becomes so smooth that it becomes, the breath becomes dirgha sukshma, it appears as if it is naturally held. That state is called pranayama in Yoga Sutras. But really, if we go back into the ancient texts, mantra was the way to work on pranayama. That is why Om or Omkara is called Pranava. Pranava, Pranayama, Pranava, the carrier of prana. Om is the original pranayama. So many ways to recite it. I cannot go into that right now. 2, let's take an example of another mantra, Gayatri mantra, another very common mantra. Are you aware of Gayatri mantra? Yeah? तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्, और ओम भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्, और even longer version, ओम भूर ओम भुवः ओम स्वः ओम महा ओम जनः ओम तपः ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्, ओम आपो ज्योतिरसोमृतं ब्रह्म भूर्भुवस्वरोम. This is a complete mantra. And when we recite this mantra audibly, automatically your breath ratio of inhale and exhale and the time that is taken in between changes to 1:4:2:1. 1:4:2:1. Which is, by the way, the ratio of Anuloma Viloma. So Anuloma Viloma is derived from Gayatri Mantra. Practicing Anuloma Viloma is like practicing Gayatri Mantra, or practicing Gayatri Mantra is like practicing Anuloma Viloma. Pranayamas are derived from mantra. So the second thing I want you to remember is there are many ways to pranayama. Mantra is one way to pranayama, which can be the bhakti marga. Some of you may be aware, some of you may not be aware that there are so many ways to invoke different gods and goddesses, stutis and stotras, and chalisa. Chalisa, the word chalisa means 40, which means 40 verses dedicated to a particular divinity, like Hanumana Chalisa. Have you heard of that? Hanumana Chalisa? If not, Google it or listen to it, which are 40 verses in the praise of, as an homage to the Prana god, which is Hanumana. 40 verses. Why 40 verses? Even in our current text of Hatha Yoga Pradipika and Gheran Samhita, it talks about 40 rounds of pranayama that a practitioner must practice 40 rounds. It is that number itself is derived from Chalisa, which means that you have to do 20 rounds of Anuloma Viloma, which will become 40 rounds of breath. I'm just trying to make a connection for you that there is more than one way to pranayama. You can increase your prana through diet. You can increase your prana through deep sleep. You can work on deep sleep through shavasana. You can work on calming down the mind, all that rajas and tamas, to transform into sattva, which is equal to prana and pranayama, through practices of yoga nidra, through practices of mudras, not just breath calibration and breath attunement. The third thing that I want you to remember is all breath attunements. When I say breath attunements, I'm using this word to specifically talk about Anuloma Viloma, Bhastrika, Ujjayi, and so on and so forth. All breath attunement practices are basically smoothening of the prana passages or friction release exercises, or think of them as erasers. They are themselves not pranayama, they lead to pranayama. What does it mean? It's a little confusing, right? What did I say? What it means is, let's talk about the classical kumbhakas, which is Anuloma Viloma, in which you alternately breathe through the two nadis or nostrils. When I say that they are basically friction releases or erasers, we have to think, what are the entry points of prana in our body? The entry points of prana in our body are all the openings: nostrils, eyes, ears, mouth, navel. These are the entry points of prana into the body. Now think about pranayama or classical kumbhakas. Anuloma Viloma, you are releasing friction in the Ida and Pingala nadi. Brahmari, you are releasing friction through the notches of the eye, the ears, the mouth opening. Shitali pranayama through the mouth. Shitkari pranayama through the mouth. Ujjayi pranayama, another place where the prana or the breath is transformed, throat. Bhastrika, chest. Surya Bhedana, right nadi. Chandra Bhedana, left nadi. All the classic pranayama are nothing but you are releasing frictions at the point of entry of prana. So that is not pranayama. The consequence is pranayama. When we think of, oh, I'm doing 10 rounds of Anuloma Viloma, I have done my pranayama. No, my dear friends, you have just cooked the food. You did not eat it yet. It's like I cook the food really following the recipe and buying the organic ingredients and making sure that my mind is at the right place. And I cooked this beautiful meal. I put it on the table and I turned around and went away. Pranayama is savoring that meal. After the practice, staying with that state of mind, that is pranayama. These are the three things that I wish for you to remember from our class today. Maybe just even one thing, but think about it, mull over it. Bandha. Bandha is, the word bandha means a lock, but not lock in the sense of tightening or tensing. Because sometimes when we think of lock, we think of tightening and tensing. Think about it as a dam. How the dam is holds the water and redirects the water. In the same way, the bandhas are practices of redirecting the prana. That prana don't go below from this point, move upwards from this point. Bandhas help create loop so the prana now flows in the upper body, not the physical body, subtle body. The prana flows now in the heart chakra or the throat chakra. The prana now rises up because the places below are held, so the prana does not fall below. So bandhas are practiced after pranayama. They are not practiced during asanas as muscular contractions and muscular tensions. This is one thing I want you to understand about bandha, is that it is not the lock in the sense of a physical tension or muscular contraction. It is a redirection of prana, where the closing is the opening. The closing is the opening, that I'm closing it in this direction so that it flows in the other direction. Are you with me? That bandha is not lock in the sense of closing, it is a redirection of prana. Bandhas are not done in the body or in the state of mind. If the mind is tamasic or rajasic or overwhelmed or stressed or emotions, we are emotionally in a state of grief or overexcitement or anger, that is not when bandhas are done, because bandhas act as a catalyst. Whatever is your state of mind and emotions, it is going to multiply that. Bandhas have prerequisites. Bandhas should be done after the practice of shatkriyas, after the pacification of doshas, after the practices like Surya Namaskara, which makes the prana available. Surya Namaskara itself is pranayama, if we don't overdo it, because then it is prana exertion. All those movements, contraction, stretch, that rhythm is to make the prana that may be trapped in the muscles and bones and internal organs and glands, make it available in the whole body. So Surya Namaskar itself is a pranayama. The consequence of it, not the practice. The consequence of it is a pranayama. Before the practices of bandhas, side note by the way, bandhas are mudras. Bandhas are subset of mudras, are a kind of mudras, which means that they make the energy move, the prana move in loop in a circuit. So bandhas are practiced when there is pranayama, when the prana becomes available. Why is it done? So that we can redirect the prana upwards. What does it mean by upwards? Simply means for concentration. Upwards is not head. Upwards means a state of concentration, a state of focusing. So bandhas means redirection of prana and not physical contraction or tensing or muscular tightening. That leads to so many further tensions in the body. I have heard so much about engage Mula Bandha, as if by tightening the buttock muscles and the anus region, we practice Mula Bandha. The practices of bandhas that are talked about in the texts are talked about in the context of after pranayama to further move into the state of meditation. They are not practiced in physical movements. They are practiced to simply do an internal movement of the prana upwards. Upwards in the central channels. What does it mean by the prana moving in the central channel? Simply means a state of concentration and meditation. The second thing is bandhas require preparation. The prana must be available. For that, one must practice some kind of Shat kriyas, cleansing practices, shat karmas. If you do not know what are shat karmas, I would recommend you to look it up in this book, Yoga Ancient Heritage, Tomorrow's Vision. There is a chapter dedicated to shat karmas, shat kriyas. Practices like Kapal Bhatti, Agni Sara, Nauli, Tratak, Neti, tongue scraping, nasal rinse, all of them are shat karmas. Even Nadi Shodhan is shat karma. Hmm? These are all shat karmas. They must be done before the practice of bandha. Two, bandhas, as I said, are not just physical contraction. Do you know bandhas can happen effortlessly and naturally when you are in meditation? The fact that you're in meditation is already a proof that bandhas have happened. You cannot be in meditation without bandha, which means that they are pranic contractions. They are not physical contraction of the pelvic floor and the abdominal muscles and the throat. In order to bring attention to these regions that our mind can concentrate initially, like a child draws on a dotted line to learn how to write the number 1 or number 2, you create dots. In the same way, we as adults learning how to do yoga, how to concentrate, initially contract our pelvic floor and contract our abdomen, just to remind the mind, you have to concentrate in the throat, in the abdomen, in the pelvic floor. Just for that connection, just for that connection to be made. Once you are able to make that connection by concentration, nothing physically obvious happens. It's all internal, it's all subtle. So bandhas can happen with mantra like Om. Bandhas can happen with concentration practices. Bandhas are not tightening. And then there are mudras which are practiced before the practice of bandhas. I'll give you one example. Let's take the example of the common bandhas are Mula Bandha, Udyana Bandha, Jalandhar Bandha, commonly known as root lock, abdominal lock, and throat lock, chin lock. I already have a problem with this translation. You know why I have a problem, because it doesn't convey the meaning and it makes us misunderstand a practice as some kind of tightening. But let's just say root lock, because all of us are familiar with that, or chin lock because we are familiar with that. Before we practice Jalandhar Bandha, the practice of Brahma Mudra is essential to gain awareness of the throat region. Or before we practice the tongue lock, which is Jivha Bandha, the practice of lion gesture, Simha Mudra, is essential to gain awareness of this entire apparatus. Or the practice of Ashwini Mudra and Vajroli Mudra, which are pelvic floor practices, are done to gain awareness of the pelvic floor. Or Tadagi Mudra, which is the abdominal mudra, is practiced to gain awareness of the abdominal region. I know I'm talking a lot of stuff and I'm also looking at the time now. I really hope that you can have these 3 takeaways. What is the meaning of bandha? 2, that bandhas happen naturally when you are meditating, and bandhas are a pranic redirection and contraction. Nothing apparent happens at the physical level. Those are all preparatory exercises. Even if you see them being talked about, or if you see them being as instructions led into, they are just preparatory exercises. The real bandha happens internally, not externally. And 3, that there is preparation to bandhas. You don't just get into bandha. I'm going to stop here.